Bonjour, buongiorno, Ohio gozaimasu, guten Tag or guten Morgen, dobre din, and sabakir. I think I got them all.
Buenos dias.
Buenos dias, and yes, buenos dias. Pardonnez-moi. My name is Ken Sislak. I'm filling in for Jerry Springer. For my European friends who don't know who Jerry Springer was, he was a TV host that ran a TV show that was always controversial. And some of the guests were also controversial, and sometimes they threw chairs at each other. So to this morning, we have some distinguished panelists. We have Brian Kelly. He's now the executive director of the California High-Speed Rail Authority. I met Brian when we were working on the California State Rail Plan. Lori Willocks, she's with the Texas Central Rail. She's their CFO. I have Jennifer Mitchell. I've known her since she was a little girl in graduate school. And I watched her career blossom. She's now the director of the Virginia Department of Rail and Public Transportation, taking over from my friend Karen Ray many years ago. And David Henley, he is working on the Baltimore, Washington superconducting Maglev project. And we have Dennis Newman, who migrated from the airline industry over to AMTRAK with Mr. Anderson and is now the network planning director for AMTRAK. For the people who are from outside the United States, you heard a wonderful presentation by ARC about the mega regions. A while back, a group called America 2050 put together this map. It's been sort of like the map that we've been using to explain mega regions, and it pretty much matches the data that Harvard University put together. So you can see that we have lots of growing metropolitan areas, and our discussion prior to this one shows how that is growing. For those of you who are familiar with this, for our European friends, this is the designated high-speed rail corridors. These corridors were designated by Congress, and this is the map that we were working on when the two Karens were funding the development of these programs under the Obama administration. A lot of these projects got started, including the one in California that Brian's going to talk about. Not much has changed since I did this presentation last year. What's in green has been funded and constructed and running. Karen Ray cut the ribbon on the Harrisburg to Philadelphia high-speed rail line many years ago. We've got the high-speed rail, or 110 miles an hour. Not true high-speed rail, but at least we call it that, between St. Louis and Chicago to Detroit. And of course, Brian's project is being constructed in the Central Valley in California, and studies are ongoing in Las Vegas to Victorville and Dallas to Houston, which you'll hear Lori talk about that. If we overlay the mega regions onto the high-speed rail map, you can see that there was some thought given to this, much like some thought was given to how we developed the interstate highway system many years ago. So at least there seems to be a semblance of a plan that serves these mega regions. So I want to really talk now and ask Brian. I said, okay, Brian, so Obama's administration gave you billions and billions of dollars, and the California voters gave you a bond issue. How are you spending the money? What's going on in California?
So the first, what's going on in California? And the short answer is a lot is going on in California. We are a state that has committed billions now toward not just delivering a high-speed rail station, but more broadly, or a high-speed rail service, but more broadly what we call modernization of rail systems in California. So at the backbone of that, which is sort of the light green of the central spine of the state there, is the high-speed rail system, which is designed to be, and under our law, designed to be a system that connects the coastal regions of the Bay Area and Los Angeles through the cities of the Central Valley. The high-speed system that that we are building is designed to operate up to 220 miles per hour at full operations. And we are, as I'll get to in a minute, starting with about a 171-mile segment in the Central Valley, and I'll return to that momentarily. This is all in the context of a 2018 state rail plan that we adopted, where California, as I said earlier, is committed both funding from cap and trade auctions that we use to invest in greener and cleaner transportation options, and also we passed the largest gas tax increase in the history of the state of California in 2017 that provided about another $1 billion a year for public transit and rail modernization investments in California. This slide that's up now is sort of the status of the project that I now work on. Prior to starting at High Speed Rail in 2018, I was the agency secretary when we first did the rail plan, the more broad rail plan in California. This is a depiction now of the project I am currently heading, which is the High Speed Rail project in California. Just to take you through this, there's a lot going on, and again, more than I think most people realize. We spend a lot of time in California talking about what we're doing in the Central Valley. But as I said, there is a broader effort to modernize rail, and really that means for much of this electrifying rail services, passenger rail services that have long been dependent on diesel. And so the three areas of the state where this is most evident are the green lines on this map. First, in Northern California, we are funding partners in the Bay Area, electrifying the Caltrain segment, which is a commuter service that connects San Francisco with San Jose and all the way down to Gilroy. We're now partners on electrifying that service from the San Francisco to San Jose run, and we are looking forward to extending the electrification part of that ultimately down to Gilroy. The stretch in the Central Valley, which is the 171 miles, is purely high-speed rail. This is under construction now. 119 miles are under construction between that town of Madera, which is the second sort of dot from the top in the Central Valley. And under the original agreement with our federal partners, it was Madera to an area north of Bakersfield called Poplar Avenue. The problem with Poplar Avenue is it's in the middle of an orchard. And so Governor Newsom and under our leadership, we've extended that Central Valley stretch to, rather than go from Madera to an orchard, we are now contemplating and pushing to go from Merced to Fresno all the way into downtown Bakersfield and connect three cities. And there are three important cities in California because they're three of the largest growing cities in the state that are located in three of the largest or fastest growing counties in the state of California. So what you see on this map, that's the Central Valley element. Let me jump to the Southern California element, which is the Virgin Train line. This is now sort of the new emerging partner in California, the 130 miles, which is the stretch in California. The whole stretch is about 180 miles from Victorville all the way to Las Vegas. Two things happened that made this project for us much more meaningful and important, and the state is now a full, I would say, partner on this public-private partnership here. One is the leadership of the organization pushing that project changed, and Brightline Trains and Virgin Trains have now become the management team over this, and that's important because they have credentials in the transportation sector. And they've also committed, and this is very important in California, to move this from a diesel train operation to electrified high-speed rail. And that's also very important in California. So now those three green lines together, 350 miles, would be fully under construction by 2022. And the dark lines that were dotted on the prior slide are the lines where we are finishing all of the environmental work to close the gap, or close the entire phase one that our voters approved a bond for in California from San Francisco all the way to LA and Anaheim. And so the next 18 to 24 months, we'll have 350 miles under construction, and we'll have all of the environmental clearance done for the San Francisco to LA, Anaheim stretch. And we will have funding gaps to get this work completed, but we'll be in a position to talk about how we fund the closure from the Central Valley to the Bay Area and from the Central Valley south into LA. We also think the emergence of the Virgin train line will provide some new opportunities on how we get electrified high-speed trains into the LA Anaheim area. So there's a lot happening.
There's a lot happening, and you said funding gaps. So how do you intend to pay for all this stuff?
Well, what you see on the line right now is really funded under the money that we currently have. And again, for us in California, we get about 25% per year of cap and trade revenues. That's coming in at about $750 million a year for us. We still have some bond dollars left. You know, it's important for people to understand, which I think most people in this room do understand. When the voters of California gave us a bond for this project, you know, they did not say, here's every dollar you need for all of the San Francisco to LA run. They gave us $9 billion for what was then estimated to be a $45 billion project. So we've now added cap and trade to that. We've gotten some federal funds from our partners here. And what you see on that screen is fundable under our estimated budget through 2030. Right there. And then we are going to have conversations about how we close those gaps where the environmental work will be done. But I think getting the environmental work done and then having the conversation in California about how we connect the valley to the coastal areas, both in the north and the south, which is the objective of the whole program, is a better conversation to have than continuing to talk about what to do in the valley. So a guy from Ohio paying his federal taxes, why should I care about sending money to California to build a high-speed train that's going to serve Californians? Well, it's not only going to serve Californians, and it's also, I think, important in the United States that we step up and be an industrialized nation when it comes to moving people. And, in California, it's particularly important. I think, we make investments. We're trying to get three things done. We're trying to meet our environmental objectives. We're trying to improve mobility in a very transformational way in a state that's got serious mobility problems, and we're trying to expand economic opportunity. These kinds of investments, I mean, I don't mind being the demonstration or the guinea pig on this. There's been mistakes in the past, but we want to get this done and show what it can do. I know the $4 billion we've invested in the Valley right now has developed and turned into about $8.5 billion in economic development opportunity in the Central Valley, which happens to be one of the most disadvantaged economic areas in the country. We are now dispatched 3,200 workers on that project. We have 500 small businesses working on it. So there's a lot that we've achieved. And I think if California can show the way, I expect others might follow. Some would say that Texas is going to beat you guys to the punch. They got their environmental clearance and they're borrowing money. And Lori, why don't you tell us about what's going on in Texas?
Sure, yeah, we're off to the races, and I think it was great. I feel almost like my presentation was a little bit done for me with Mike earlier, so he did a great job. The Texas corridor was chosen because of its great commercial opportunity. So the train is going to connect the fourth and fifth largest economies in the United States, creating a super economy within Texas. And to put that into context for everybody a little bit, the Texas economy, the size of the Texas economy is roughly the same as the size of the economy of Canada, the country. And then within Texas, about 70% of the economy is driven by Houston and North Texas. So it's a $1 trillion GRP. It's huge and it's growing. There's about, as Mike was saying, there's a lot of population growth, and there's about 500 people moving into the state every day. And most of those people are moving into North Texas, Houston, or Austin. And so the train is there to help with all of the issues that a growing economy presents. And so as you can see on this, there's a huge benefit across the entire state. The economic development that we were just talking about is evident when you have a project of this scale and size. $36 billion of economic impact is what's currently estimated. We're bringing jobs throughout the state, and it will actually bring jobs throughout the entire country. There's estimated to be about 10,000 workers working on to build the project at peak. There will be over 1,000 permanent jobs. 25% of those will be located in the rural communities between North Texas and Houston. So it's a great project for the entire state and the entire country. As I was saying, this is construction on a Texas-sized scale, so it's $14 billion of investment in the civil infrastructure. It's just a huge, huge project in terms of logistics, and this is really where the entire country gets involved. The materials needed to construct the system cannot be sourced all from within the state of Texas, so it will draw on resources from everywhere. And that's great for the whole United States. There will be, to put it in perspective, the concrete alone is about 3 times the scale of what was needed to build the Hoover Dam. It's tremendous. 1,100 miles of rail, 3 passenger stations. It's just going to be a great project for the U.S. and Texas.
So this is a big project. It's going to cost a lot of money. How much money, and where are you going to get the money?
Well, that's a big question. So it's going to cost a lot of money. So you can see 14 billion. So we're estimating somewhere in between 18 to 20-ish billion. We're in the middle of the starting the capital raise now, and so we're looking at it's a privately funded project. So we're looking for private money to come in and.
So is this going to be a mixture of debt and equity, or how are you going to do this?
Absolutely. Yeah, it will be a mixture of debt and equity, just like all commercial transactions. If you think of an office building, how an office building is financed, it's no different. It's just on a much larger scale.
So if this is a private enterprise with a mix of debt and equity, okay, I understand the equity portion. People are going to buy stock in your railroad, but you're going to borrow money from banks and others, and how are you going to pay it back?
We're going to pay it back with the growth that you see within Texas. So as we just talked about, there's a huge economy there, and there's a lot of people moving. There's already 16 million people moving in between the cities today, and there's a huge problem. There's congestion. It's not a fun trip to go from Dallas to Houston. Anybody that has ever done that, if you've driven it, you have no idea how long it may or may not take you. On a good day, it might take you 3.5 to 4 hours. On a bad day, we just had Thanksgiving, and a few of my colleagues were in Houston, and they had 7 and 8 hour trips back to Dallas. So you just don't know. It's unpredictable. We're offering an option for a very growing economy to give people the ability to get someplace very quickly, reliably, and conveniently.
So passenger fares and...
Absolutely.
Okay. I'll believe it when I see it. Jennifer, you're in an interesting position because you bridge between the southeast mega region and the northeast mega region, and you guys are spending a lot of money in Virginia on passenger rail. What's going on there?
Sure. So as you can see, we really are the connection between the Northeast Corridor and the Southeast Corridor. We have our passenger trains that originate in Richmond and parts of the state also do go into the Northeast Corridor and our Northeast regional trains. So in some ways, we are becoming like a southern terminus to the Northeast Corridor. But we also have a lot of gateways to the West Coast as well, particularly for freight rail. But we're working very closely with FRA and our other partners to we've completed the majority of the environmental documentation. If you want to go to the next slide. We've just got our record of decision for rail improvements, primarily to build a 3rd track between Richmond and DC. We got that record of decision earlier this year, and then the Richmond to Raleigh segment was completed in 2018. And right now, probably the most critical link is here in DC, which is the Long Bridge, and you can actually. Which is the Long Bridge, and it's the bridge that connects Virginia to DC. It's a big bottleneck. It's currently a 2-track bridge owned by CSX that needs to be expanded to 4 lanes. It's at 98% capacity. Every passenger train we have, every commuter rail train goes over this bridge. It's actually 70% passenger and only 30% freight. It's also the only bridge within 70 miles, and as you know, trains do not travel as the crow flies, and so there's really no network redundancy. It would have a huge ripple effect up and down the East Coast if it were to go down or be under maintenance for any sustained period of time. However, though, the bridge itself, in constructing the bridge, does not unlock all of the capacity we need. So we've identified a whole program of projects south of that. The bridge itself, it's about a 1.5 mile corridor within DC itself, from the banks of the Potomac River into L'Enfant Station, and then heading north into Union Station from there. But south of there, we also have fully funded a 4th track project between Alexandria and DC, which will be the Virginia approach to that, a third track project farther south of that, and a number of sidings all the way down between DC and Virginia. We've also our goal here, our long-term goal is separation. Right now, CSX, all of our passenger trains are commingled either with CSX or Norfolk Southern on their rail. But our long-term goal is creating a fully separated network. So the program of projects that we're putting together will essentially move all of the our commuter and AMTRAK service over to the east side of the tracks, whereas CSX and the freight travel will take the west side or the west tracks. As a part of that, we're also building a flyover, which if you know Northern Virginia, it's in the Franconia area that will move all of the trains from the east side to the west side so that they can line up for the two tracks serving the new Long Bridge. So the new bridge itself, while it will be designed to be interoperable, is going to be primarily just for the passenger, and CSX and their bridge will remain for freight. We expect the bridge to be in public ownership. And we're not going to make a $2 billion investment just for a privately owned bridge. And so we are working with CSX on that right now as well. So the important thing, though, for us, the reason we're making these big investments in Virginia is that, first of all, we recognize that we really are that connection between the Northeast Corridor and the Southeast. We have a lot of passenger rail service today. Our ridership was up 10% this year. Actually, our ridership in October, while we don't have official numbers yet, was up 30% over October of last year. So and congestion in Virginia is getting worse and worse. If any of you drive I-95 between DC and Richmond, you know that it's it's one of the most congested corridors in the country. We had VDOT do a study looking at the cost of building a new lane on I-95 for essentially 50 miles between the Beltway down to Spotsylvania County, Virginia, and $12.6 billion. What we also determined is that on day 2 of it being open, traffic conditions will essentially be the same as it is today. 10 years from that investment, they will be worse than they are today. So we really can't continue to build our way out of congestion with highways. And so we're looking to make some pretty big strategic investments in rail. We have put together, we're putting together a funding plan for this right now. We've got, I would say, the majority of our funds lined up through a variety of state funding sources. We have dedicated rail funds that generate about $55 million a year, plus some other statewide priority transportation funds, and pretty much every other transportation dollar that's not otherwise nailed down, we're pouring into this program. We're working very closely with AMTRAK and expect AMTRAK to also be a funding partner. We have toll revenues in Northern Virginia that we can, because those toll corridors parallel some of these VRE services. We can also use those toll revenues to help expand the bridge, because we can't expand commuter rail until we actually expand the bridge. And so I would say stay tuned. We're very close to having everything put together. We're heading into our General Assembly session in January, and we expect that after that we hope to be able to move forward. We expect to begin final design on our 4th track project early next year, begin preliminary engineering on the Long Bridge probably this spring of 2020, and hopefully get our ROD from federal FRA by the end of 2020 as well. So
Lots of going on, and mostly funded by the public
yes,
through taxes.
all
Infrastructure.
and toll revenues.
And toll revenues. Okay, cool. Another going farther north, David Henley is with the Baltimore, Washington superconducting maglev private company. They want to build the super maglev between those major cities, siphon off some of Amtrak's passengers on the Northeast Corridor, and
Share the wealth.
make a lot of money for the private company. Okay, tell me what you're really doing.
Okay, what we're really doing is we're leveraging the technology that's been under development for a couple of decades from Japan, and it's being deployed in Japan, the superconducting maglev. And they're operating or extending their technology into the world's most populated rail corridor. So we thought, being number 2 in the world, we deserve a piece of the action. So between New York and Washington, D.C. is the route at over 300 miles per hour, we can do that trip between New York and Washington, D.C. in 1 hour with a stop in Philadelphia. At this point, we're not building out the entire extension between the two cities. The first phase under a grant through the FRA is to look at the route possibilities between DC and Baltimore. And we're in the middle of the DEIS process right now. The EIS process, we've determined what we think is the route. That will get certified probably mid-next year. It's a lot different than the route during our planning stages that we anticipated it would be, but because the EIS is done independently of us, we're sort of a stepchild to that process. We're cooperating, we're providing the engineering support, but whereas we thought it was going to be 50% elevated, 50% underground, it shifted and we had to be poised and ready to adapt to that. So it's now 75% underground and 25% above ground. So the cost is measurably different. So we had to be poised and ready to apply that very, very highly specific technology to that new routing scheme. So we're in that process right now, and we're expecting mid-next year to have the route confirmed, the station locations confirmed, downtown DC, just South Baltimore, also the stop at BWI. By the way, BWI Airport is a major player in this and a big fan of this project. And going on up the corridor, eventually, we are going to be hitting different airports, Philadelphia Airport, Newark Airport. That's part of our planning strategy, is to help integrate travel between airline and high-speed rail, sort of make it a seamless trip. If you're planning if you're living in Washington, D.C., but your flight is to for Paris is out of Philadelphia, it's a seamless one-ticket ride from train to airport. And so that's far into the future. Right now, we're just concentrating on grappling with the current process, which is, as I mentioned, probably mid-next year we'll have the route, stations, everything determined, and then it's another year of EIS to figure out the mitigations.
So this is going to cost a lot of money, and similar to Lori, you're going to have to probably borrow money and go issue.
More debt than equity for this phase. Going into this a number of years ago, based on 50% above and below, it was about $10 billion. Since the process shifted gears on us, it's probably closer to $15 billion. And that's at this point, we've got another couple
So
of years.
I think it's rather intriguing for many of us in this room to understand that the two private companies are trying to use debt and equity to build something that the rest of the world seems to only go to the government to get funds.
Yeah.
I mean, Japan, Europe, all the infrastructure is funded by the government, and the train operating companies try to make a profit running trains, or at least pay for their operating expenses anyway.
Yeah.
So this is going to be interesting and intriguing. Even the airlines in this country, our next speaker migrated from that industry, even the airlines, all they have to do is buy airplanes, and they couldn't make money doing it.
Crash-worthy airplanes.
Yes. So anyway, Dennis, you guys at AMTRAK have a national network of long-distance trains. You're running state-supported services everywhere. The states are willing to pay you lots of money to run trains on the freight railroad network. And you own and operate and maintain the Northeast Corridor. What's going on with AMTRAK? And I really want to get into your network visions.
All right. Well, thank you, Ken. So lots going on at AMTRAK. And we have, as you say, we do have a national network. We're serving 46 states, the District of Columbia, and we also go up to 3 provinces in Canada. So we've got a very wide footprint providing mobility solutions to many, many people. As we mentioned on here, well, we mentioned twice, 2 different years, but 32.5 million passengers in 2019. So, quite a lot of service to a wide range of the public. This is kind of the AMTRAK by the numbers slide. We've got a lot, there's also billions of dollars in purchases and economic impact that we bring to a wide swath of the country, more than 20,000 employees as well. So if we flip over, to the next slide. 2019 was really a great year for AMTRAK. We had a really good safety performance during the year, making advancements in our safety management system, and records in ridership and revenue and in our operating earnings. And the reason we talk about that some is obviously it's part of our mission to minimize the subsidy that is required for providing our services, but also getting to, as we plan to get to this year, to a break-even basis on operating earnings, gives it helps communicate the success and the possibilities for intercity passenger rail. And since we do have a lot of needs for infrastructure investment and capital, more dollars that that we can devote to capital instead of to covering operating losses is really critically important to us. So, as we look at our network, and you've seen the mega regions pictures a lot, this one adds a little bit more info where it's got the growth rates are depicted by the colors of the different metro areas. You can see those growing mega MSAs in the south and west. And also, we've kind of overlaid what sort of frequency we have by the thickness of the lines in our network. And you can see there are very few places where we've got frequent service. Obviously, the Northeast Corridor, where we have high-speed rail, we really do provide a good amount of frequency, and that provides the kind of utility that will attract customers. But with the exception of some spots in California and the Midwest, we have these mega regions are really very much underserved. So we think there's a lot of opportunity out there for additional intercity passenger rail service. And there are a lot of approaches that you've heard panelists here talk about today. We think there's plenty of opportunity to go around. And in our view, if we flip to the next slide, really all of the mega regions, including the ones where we have a significant amount of service right now, have got potential for more growth. And what we are engaged in and what we need to do is continue to work with the states and try to work also at a regional level to identify where are the best opportunities for us to provide more trip time competitive intercity passenger rail. And so we have been adding things and adding frequencies and extending routes in Virginia, in California. And we've been going around in the last several months talking to states all over the place about where we think opportunities are and trying to talk to the states about, well, okay, what do you think the opportunities are and where can we work together and also partner with the federal government to try and expand. So we've been to Colorado, we've been to Arizona, we've been to many of the Midwest states, really made it all around. And that's kind of where we see a lot of opportunity to develop. Maybe not everywhere has got the density that will support the kind of investment for high-speed rail. There are a lot of places where higher speed rail, or as fastest we could rail, could provide good solutions for people, and really is worthwhile to give people another alternative for travel that contributes to economic growth and provides a more efficient routing.
So Dennis, you came from the airline industry. What is similar and not so similar in trying to plan a network between airplanes and trains, other than the fact that airplanes fly and trains don't?
Well, a few things. I mean, obviously the main similarity is that you're trying to identify where's what are the economics and what are the opportunities for moving people from one place to another. But one thing I learned very quickly is that it's a lot harder in the railroad business, and partially because you're not flying through air, right? We need to build the infrastructure, and that takes more time and takes more planning, takes a good amount of funding as well, but provides provides better solutions in the appropriate places, in the places where we can be trip time competitive, where we can let people avoid the hassle of going through the airport and get to their flight. Just give them a simpler route downtown to downtown. The other thing that's different and is a challenge is really just the availability of data that you can look at past history and be able to extrapolate from. I mean, in the airline industry and planning, you've got double-digit numbers of airlines operating flights all over the place. You have all their schedules. You've got all the history of what those planes carried, and you can really have very robust models that can look at the past history and really give you a very good ability to forecast out. In rail, we've got good models, but they've got to make some more assumptions about how many people you're going to get off the road and how many people you're going to get from air, how many trips you can induce, and so you have to rely on some more outside of the U.S. History, or what we can build in the examples that we've got in the U.S. So we haven't added as many routes as Amtrak intercity in the last several decades. So the need for really having to think twice, maybe three times about what your projections look like is definitely a little bit more challenge.
If I may add on to that, I sort of look at Maglev as bridging train and aviation, because when we start our train out, it is on airplane wheels, and when it gets up to 90 miles per hour, it is levitating and flying, literally flying between stations. So, to the respect that we're sort of wedding the two technologies in a way. That's practically speaking the reality is that we're in effect both. I had a conversation with BWI Airport because we're going to have a station underneath, and I raised the issue of we're going to be using a lot of your real estate, and she said, well, it's preserved for aviation use, and I said, well, I think I could consider ourselves aviation use. And she said, nice try.
If you're going to be 75% underground, put it in a tube, call it Hyperloop.
Well, I get that a lot, believe me. And Hyperloop is an interesting concept. It is a concept. It's not a proven technology. Whereas our project has carried hundreds of thousands of people and been in operation for 1 million plus miles. So there's a stark difference between an idea and a practical application.
So you've heard from all of our panelists. AMTRAK uses a lot of public money, in fact, all public money. Even the revenue from the states is public money. California is going to be using public money. Virginia uses public money. Even tolls is public money. It's a tax on people who drive on your turnpikes. We have two private operators that are going to use debt and equity to finance it and pay it back with fares. That's an interesting concept, and people will say, I think you guys are dreaming. What's your response to that?
Well, we have to convince the lenders, first of all. That's the first step in terms of infrastructure loans, whether that's RIF loans. A Japanese bank has actually evaluated the concept and done very rigorous passenger surveys and tested the reality, the marketability of the concept, and is very satisfied. As of 2012, 2013, they did revenue and ridership studies, which proved that there is a pent-up market between New York and DC, but not only between that, but DC and Baltimore. And part of this EIS process, the final deliverable, is a financial plan which evidences that it is going to be sustainable from ridership revenues. And so we have to prove the case. We've in 2018 did a revisit of the revenue and ridership that was originally done in 2012, 2013, and evidence a 10% growth. So we're pretty confident that we can go to lenders and make them satisfied that we will be able to not only pay pay them back, but also make a profit.
So Dennis, what do you think of them siphoning off your riders off the Northeast Corridor?
Well, I think actually that for the country, it is interesting to have innovation and try to see whether new technologies and how they can be applicable and what's going to work. So, we think we provide a very competitive product. So, we welcome competition, and we think that we're going to continue to work to fulfill our mission and provide transportation. We're going to stop at more places than the Maglev will. We think that we'll see what develops, but we'll be working hard to make ourselves the best product we can be.
Yeah, the Northeast Corridor is big and getting bigger. So the population growth is arcing up. AMTRAK is selling out every day. They're bursting at the seams. That to me suggests there's room for players. And we're pretty confident that we're going to serve a market that's distinct from AMTRAK. So there may be some layover, some siphoning, as you suggest. But I think the majority of people that we're going to attract are a different kind of passenger, and a lot of people that are getting out of their cars. So more people getting out of their cars than people leaving Amtrak.
I wanted to have a chance to respond to your first question about from the Texas perspective of investor supported backed infrastructure in the United States. And for us, it all starts with the market. So you have to have the right market for an investor-led approach to make sense. It definitely does not make sense everywhere. What we are doing, which is unique, is we are not building a high-speed rail network across Texas. We are origin destination. We have two very significant economic engines on each side of us, and that's what makes us unique, and that's what makes this work. This does not work in many countries throughout the world because it is governments that are backing these systems, and they have policy reasons that they are developing networks, not origin destination pairs. And so with that, we do have to convince debt, but before we convince debt, we have to convince equity because they're in the risk position, and they are definitely our biggest critics. And so we're very confident. We have been out talking for years to investors. There's a lot of excitement in the market for the right project in the right marketplace.
So the two private sector operators are going to cherry pick some really good routes and leave the rest of the Amtrak in California to run integrated networks with public funding. I think that's unique, and I think that's the American way. Brian, there's a lot of discussion in California right now about why in the world are you spending all this money in the Central Valley to run 200-mile-an-hour trains when maybe some of that money can be spent to electrify maybe parts of Metrolink, actually tunnel through the Tehachapi's to actually connect rail to Los Angeles from Bakersfield, because now it's a throughway bus that takes forever to get over the mountains. It's not fun. How do you respond to the critics saying you're building a train from nowhere to nowhere? Merced to Bakersfield, I've driven that route. It's pretty...
It takes 3 hours.
It takes a long time.
To drive that route.
Yeah.
It'll take you now an hour.
I know.
So, look, this project in California, our voters passed a bond back in 2008, and as I said earlier, provided 20% of the cost to get the entire project done. So for the last 11 years, it's been about getting environmental work done. We started construction, candidly, too early in the Central Valley, and we're dealing with some of those challenges from that now. Going forward in California, we have, sort of three things happening at once. There's the emergence of transitioning diesel commuter service in the Bay Area to electrified. Right now, there's a rail service, AMTRAK, we provide with a partnership with AMTRAK, that provides service in the Central Valley. And what we want to offer them, but to me, the challenges are none of it is giving Californians what I think they want and need to have a true alternative to driving. And so when you look at what passenger rail services are we providing in California today, look, right now we have a once-a-day train that goes from the LA Basin to San Francisco Bay Area, and it takes 13 hours. Okay, that's today's service. Now we have these other services that are good kind of commute intercity services that are used, but they're still not used at the level they can be. What we want to provide here is a way to provide the faster technology through the valley, reduce about 100 minutes of that travel time, connect closely with AMTRAK in the Merced area, which then has service to Sacramento and the Bay Area as an interim early service model. It's time for us to demonstrate what electrified high-speed rail can do in California. It's been 11 years of an abstract concept, and now we have enough budget to show what it can do, connect well with our other operators, and get Californians to experience that. And then, as I said earlier, our full objective under the bond bill and the direction from our voters is to, going forward, connect all of it into the Bay Area and the Los Angeles Basin. And with the private Virgin train line coming into the LA Basin, we think there's great opportunity to figure out, perhaps together, how we can do that. That is truly a public-private project. They're taking the risk right now on the Vegas to Victorville run, and the public part of that is allowing them to get some access to low-cost capital. Again, they're taking the risk, but tax-exempt bonds are something the state approved for that project. Our agency Transportation Secretary has to cede the right-of-way, if you will, because they're building in the public space for that project, so that has to happen on the public side. And then we have an MOU with them where we want to work on interoperability issues, perhaps economies of scale, as we both are doing things like buying equipment for electrified high-speed rail. So look, there's a lot of ways this thing started, and there's a lot of ways it's evolving, but I've been doing transportation policy for 25 years in California, and I've never seen a project as transformative as this in terms of what it means to the users. And so for me, it's a no-brainer. And again, we have some budget. There's a lot of argument about did we start in the right place or not. That's a decision made 11 years ago that I'm not going to revisit now. We're going to do the best we can with what we have. But I see a path going forward where we can provide this service to Californians in the relatively near term and then grow. And again, we now have in California state investment and a private entity investing in electrified high-speed rail. That's a good thing.
So Karen, you've been the director of transportation in Pennsylvania, Virginia. You were at the FRA, helped funding these projects. What do you think of all this?
Well, first of all, I want to thank all of you, because one of the things I think we've been doing at the high-speed rail is there are a lot of people that want to help make this all happen, but unless we have the people that are making the decisions and buying the services, it's really not all that helpful to advance the agenda. So I just had two quick comments in addition to thanking APTA for this particular group and having this conversation. The first is a question for AMTRAK, and it's a request that's kind of built on strategically thinking about future funding. When you had the graphic up there about your operating losses and things, isn't it important that we also talk about how much is being invested by the states? Because it puts a partial picture up there of the money it takes to keep the current system running. But I think if we talk about needing more and more money, then if we also show the state investments that complement that, it'd be a better, stronger story for us to tell as a base. Just one question on that.
Yep, Karen, I think that's a fair point. We as you know, as we've been looking at future development, and you know, as I'm sure you know, half of our ridership is in our state-supported network, and that's in these mega regions and elsewhere. That's where we really see a lot of growth potential for us. As we've been doing the analysis, we've really been looking at what's the, you know, in our forecasts, what would be what do we think the public subsidy per rider would be? And that would be including both what what the operating earnings could be for Amtrak, as well as what we think would need to be funded by states. So that's really kind of the lens that we're using to look at things is, what's the whole picture in terms of what is most likely to be successful, taking into account both the funding from us and from states.
Okay, and then the one other question for Laura in particular, and with all our UIC colleagues, when I was in Europe, the big driver of the other revenues besides ticket revenues was real estate. And since I have a daughter in Houston, husband's from Dallas, and I was in Austin, I know a little bit about this. DART in particular has shown how effective you can be at using the real estate side. So could you speak just a moment, because I know that's part of your financial plan is a lot of the real estate is owned by the potential future owners of this system, this private system, and how that fits into the other revenues you're talking. You've been talking, I know, about how much they can generate, but that whole line, which I'm too familiar with also, is really, really ripe for this kind of development, I think.
Great. Well, always nice to meet a future passenger. But the so kind of big picture, it is the system that we're talking about and the offering that we are making to our investors is about fare box revenue. The operations of the business have to make sense first and foremost. Then you can do things like you're talking about. We will own in the right of way. Which is a bit unusual. And so there's a lot of potential opportunities to monetize that in different ways. That's not part of the offering that we are presenting to investors. We talk about it conceptually, but investors are going to invest with us because the business itself makes sense and is profitable and can sustain itself all on its own.
Okay, thank you.
I've got a comment for Brian and then a question for Dennis. Oh, Karen Hedlund from WSP, former.
I'm sorry, Karen Ray.
Yeah, I was her successor as deputy administrator. I just want everyone to know that the reason California started construction maybe too early, as Brian put it, was not because they were stupid. There was an artificial deadline set by the funding statute under which they got the money. It was the Recovery Act, and it had to be spent in a certain number of years. The Central Valley was ready to go, not as ready as perhaps it should have been. But it wasn't because people were stupid. It was because of what was put into the statute. And the lesson learned from there is as we go forward and as we get more money for intercity and high-speed rail, we have to be very, very careful about how those funding requirements are established. And now, for Dennis. You lose a lot of money on your long-distance routes, have for years. When Amtrak was originally created in the 70s, the thought was it would just fade away. It has not. But you're still running on routes that were laid down 100 years ago, 150 years ago, when the demographics of the country were very different and its needs were very different from what they are today. And when you overlay your routes on the bubble map, I think it's very, very intriguing. But it's been extremely difficult for Amtrak to get the Congress to permit it to change its route system because of the strength of the politicians, particularly the electeds from out west. So at this point in time, how are you going to convince the Congress to allow you to make the investments and make the tweaks that will, for example, allow you to run from Los Angeles to Albuquerque, maybe up the Front Range, and ultimately to Denver?
Well, Karen, that's not certainly not an easy task or question. Obviously, in the end, we work for Congress, so we will fulfill the mission that we're given. Now, as the professional managers of the enterprise, we look to see how we can, make our best recommendations as to how we can best fulfill that mission. And it is certainly true that we do not make money on our long distance routes. So, but nevertheless, they provide connectivity to a lot of communities. They provide kind of that iconic trip that people are interested in. So, yeah. All we can do is make sort of the best economic presentation about where we think the growth can be, first of all, and that's where a lot of our focus is, and looking at what can we do in these mega regions, and then lay out also what the economics look like and what reinvestment will be necessary to sustain the rest of the network as it exists today, and policymakers make the decisions based on the best available facts.
Hi, Steve Strauss with Mobility Solutions Northeast, and I would just second what Karen Ray said earlier about 49% of Amtrak's riders are on state-supported trains, and states are funding that service, helping you reduce your operating losses. My question is, I guess, for Mr. Newman and maybe others, because Mr. Newman came out of the airline industry. Can you talk a little bit about the value of the fact that high-speed rail and even higher-speed rail will pull people off of crowded airports and free up more valuable airport slots for more high-value flights to longer distance and reduce the number of short-hop airline trips that I'm told are not very profitable for the airline industry? So how can we make that political argument and the economic argument that that's a big plus for investment in rail?
All right, thank you for the question. I think actually the part of what we would say there is that a lot of that has happened already. That's part of why there is some opportunity in some of these areas for higher speed rail, intercity passenger rail. If you look in Ohio, for instance, the big cities in Ohio, the 3 Cs used to have a lot more shorter haul flights. So the airlines have actually, over the last decade or so, been making a lot of those adjustments and exiting some of those shorter hops, and that's why there is some potential already for rail to come in and pick up some of that, fill that gap somewhat. So it really is sort of a story that has already somewhat played out, and it leaves an opportunity for us to go fill in.
Yeah, I'd like to add on to that. In talking with people in Europe, Japan, elsewhere, when I talk about flights from DC to New York being about 200 miles, and that's a very popular flight, they're amazed. They're just, why would anybody think to fly 200 miles per hour? And that's a choice that they can make because they have high-speed rail options. And so to the extent that we're going to fit into that model and help integrate making a train system more competitive with short-haul, uneconomically rewarding flights, I think that'll be something that'll factor in.
Hi, I'm Stan Feinsod with Transit Systems Engineering. I'd like to make an observation, and it's kind of a question. This is a very good illustration of what's wrong with intercity passenger rail in America. It hardly exists. We have very low frequencies, and if we look at the mega region map and overlay on this, our mega region connectivity is underserved by a huge amount across the country, not just in the Northeast. We have a possibility of kind of merging the ideas that were at the table. The ideas had to do with connecting places. In Virginia, connecting to the Northeast Corridor, in California, connecting the Central Valley, the major cities, eventually with Los Angeles and San Francisco, and in Texas, the Houston, Dallas, North Texas, corridors. We're talking about connecting mega regions, and there's an attractiveness to that that's bringing public money and private money. So what we might reflect on is how we can bring more private-public partnerships to the improvement of intercity passenger rail around the United States. And one way to do that is to introduce competition. Competition for the state-supported routes. Competition that brings in private sector companies with private funds to improve intercity passenger rail. This is the model that was done in Germany. It's a European model, and it isn't purely public. And by bringing our intercity passenger rail out of the 50-year monopoly that exists today and creating opportunities for private sector innovation and investment, we might finally change that map. I just ask if you have any observations on this terrible comment.
Well, just to lead off, in terms of Maglev and the type of high-speed operation that we would be deploying, is it works very well in very congested corridors, so city-to-city linkages in a discrete, defined geography. So 200-plus miles is more or less the sweet spot for us. Once we start going beyond that, it's a different model that we have not entertained, but I think we'd certainly be open to it.
I just say that I kind of agree with your assessment. I mean, I said earlier that, you know, our intercity passenger offerings in California right now, especially between the Bay Area and the Los Angeles basement by passenger rail is, you know, once a day, a 12-hour trip. That just doesn't get it done in 2019, 2020. I think what we bring, the idea of this project bringing such higher speeds, completely grade separated stretches that are dedicated to passenger rail, provide the kind of service that people are looking for, and provide a much better alternative to driving. And look, driving in California is no easy task. We have got something like five of the top 10 most congested areas in the nation. And again, this opportunity to get this project right and to provide what we can with this technology, purely grade separated passenger service at these speeds, the time is right. There's certainly challenges, but we need to keep moving forward on it.
Yeah.
Hi, I'm Paige Malott with Cascadia Rail, and I had a couple of questions. My first is for the private funding investors. What is being done to ensure that low-income communities and communities of color can use your systems if the funding model includes ticket prices to pay back the investors?
Yeah, there's going to be, so in our case, there's definitely, we are a market-driven pricing structure, right? So there's not any fare regulation on us. To that, while saying that, we also there'll be peak periods and off-peak periods, and we need to fill up the trains. There's no sense in running a train with an empty seat because regardless of the ticket price for that seat, anything is better than zero for an empty seat, right? So there will definitely be options out there for people that, college students, one of our midpoint stop is outside of College Station. College students typically think of going between the cities as a tank of gas, right? So they have a very low cost of travel threshold. We will have the opportunity to offer off-peak ticket prices that are very attractive to attract college students, and depending upon the demand of a certain service, we can do things like flash sales and things like that, which will make ticket pricing very attractive for most of the public.
And my second question is for Dennis. Could you talk a bit about the differences in carbon emissions from air travel for the regional flights and how that could look differently with a shift to high-speed rail to help meet our climate goals?
I could probably talk a little, but not much. I mean, that actually isn't an area of expertise for me. I do know that but rail as a mode in general is a very efficient way of moving folks around, and particularly as you talk about for rail on a short hop versus the the expense and the fuel burn of just getting the plane up in the air, which consumes quite a bit in the first place. So if you're not having more the efficiency of the longer stretch while you're cruising, that the shorter hops certainly have got a much higher burn per passenger mile.
It was once told to me that it takes more fuel to get a 737 off the ground in Chicago on a flight to Cleveland than a diesel train, would use for the entire trip from Chicago to New York.
Ken, this is Mike Allegra, and I represent Stadler Railcar Company. And some of you may know I spent most of my career at the Utah Transit Authority, and we saw an explosion in the development of rail. It took us 17 years to get the first line, which, by the way, today is our 20th anniversary of the first line. We built 14 other lines within 10 years after that. The point of this is there's a lot of momentum here, and I believe that when your first line, one of your first lines open up, there will be a watershed of development and growth and expansion, just like we saw in Utah. So I'm on the APTA board, I'm on the APTA Business Members Board. What else can we do to help support what I see forthcoming here in the near future in terms of our advocacy and our funding? I appreciate what APTA's done, holding these forums, getting intercity federal funds. That momentum is great, and I'm just looking for ideas on how to build on that.
Mike, you stole my thunder. That was my last question to the group, but I want
Thanks, Ken.
I want the group to defer that question to the very end as we.
Well, and I want to follow up on that question. This has been an excellent conference. I endorse everything that Stan said. I'm Ray Chambers of the Association of Independent Passenger Rail Operators. The point I want to make here is that this group is on the right track, but we right now have a window. We have a moment in history. A big bill, which could be $1 trillion infrastructure bill, depending on who wins the next Congress, or it can be the reauthorization of the Transportation Fast Act. But one of them is going to happen, and that happens about once every 5 years. And we're getting close, thanks to Karen's good work and others. We're getting close with a program to put forward. But I think it's going to be important that we do something bold, and that is to try to come up with a transformative kind of policy and get it on the table. The coordinates for that would be, I would say, the Highway Trust Fund model, the funding, all the funding coming together through the federal government with the regulations, or the European model, and what I would call the commuter model, or what you're doing in Virginia. We're going to make a stab at that through my little group. We're putting a kind of a detailed proposal on the table. It's a live document. It's something that we would look for ideas and change, and I can change anything as long as my 4 board members agree. But my point is this, is that we do have an opportunity now. They're drafting in the House and the Senate. The hearings are underway, and I think we really need to have a high sense of urgency to try to get something very bold for intercity passenger and urban, intercity and urban passenger rail working together on the table. That's not a question, that's a speech. But
Anna, you have a question? Only questions.
Okay, I have a question. It starts with Jennifer and anyone else that might want to follow. AMTRAK has made a lot of progress in its financial situation, much of it because costs have been transferred from AMTRAK to the states. Jennifer, you've noted that you're actually an extension of the corridor, and I further observe we have like a spaghetti bowl of governmental, non-governmental, quasi-governmental governance structures. Has governance kept pace? Should you be on the Northeast Corridor Commission? If the states are going to be major partners in all of this, do we have the structures in place to make that happen?
I think Jennifer should be on any commission she wants to get on.
I agree.
I don't think at this point in time we're ready to join the Northeast Corridor specifically. You're absolutely right, though, about the patchwork of different agencies and governance structures out there. You know, I think we're at the point right now in Virginia, at least, where we feel we still have some pretty big investments to make in our state in order to achieve and to actually be able to double the service that we have and actually become meaningful partners into the Northeast Corridor. With that said, though, is that we certainly support all of the efforts that the Commission is doing right now and other states in the Northeast Corridor because of, whether it's the infrastructure investments in the New York area, New Jersey, or the investments in Maryland. I mean, we recognize that we need those investments to take place in order for our service to be successful. So I could see potentially in the future that structure changing, maybe to incorporate Virginia. At this point in time, we feel that we need to make some of these big investments to actually get that capacity until we can really join and really be. But I will say as well that we are looking at governance structures in Virginia. We've been very lucky that we have we've dedicated rail funding from our General Assembly. We have a separate agency. My agency is actually a separate agency from our DOT, and as such, we have a good deal of clout and support within the state as well. And so we feel that we have a state that's been extremely supportive of passenger rail over the years, and that's not always the case. We know with some of our neighbors, especially to the south. So,
if I just may add on about governance, being part of a federal EIS process, there's 30 different participating and cooperating agencies that are involved in monitoring every aspect of the EIS. And they each have a very specific role, and they take ownership of that role very seriously. And I just want to say publicly that I love them all, and I support all of them, and I enjoy working with you as we work together cooperatively to get this project done.
Before I get to Peter, I would like to ask my friends from SNCF. SNCF in French is SNCF. So bonjour, Stephanie. You've been listening to these crazy Americans all morning talking about how we can't do anything and how maybe the private sector is going to jump ahead and build something and pay for it with fare revenue. What does SNCF think of all this, and what are you guys doing in France?
We have done a lot, but right now there is not so much project. I will give the floor to DJ after, because he's the infrastructure manager, and I work for the operator. So that make me think about is that the real problem, the real matter is the funding, of course, that's what you say, and we have the same in France. I think what is maybe what I can say on the French example is that the first line we launched in 1981 was had no need of public funding, and it was a real good example. And it shows how this line bring economic growth to the territories, and this was what give the authorities, the local authorities, that's why they want now to have their own lines, and that's why now we can't find public fundings. With this first line, I think it was an example for the rest of the system. Just another point, I don't remember who, but they talk about public-private partnership, and the last 3 lines, I think, that have been launched use public partnership, private-public partnership. So maybe, DJ, if you want to tell something more.
We build the infrastructures when the infrastructure meets the market. So the first line, there was no funding because there was the biggest market for passengers. And then the second, the third, and fourth line were as well the best infrastructure for the biggest market. But the most recent lines, they were built where the market, the passenger market, is lower than before. It was not enough to get money from the fares only. So the public, even there, and there was a private partnership, even the private company could invest, but needed some public funding because to finance the infrastructure, because the revenues from passenger fares were not enough for the private company to get the money back. So, you know, we can maybe the private sector can be more efficient than the public sector to build and to respect the deadline to build the line. But the private company, as the revenues are not enough to get the money back, needed some public funding. And the last line, high-speed line we built, needed 58% of public funding for investment, and even if it was built by a private company.
May I add something? Yes. What I want to add is that there's that kind of funding system has to be settled on really good traffic forecast and a revenue forecast. If not, it happens that it doesn't really work at the end, and that some lines may lose money. And that's maybe the most important point is this, the accuracy of the forecast.
Which is the point that Lori and David made earlier. I know that Dennis has to get to the Hill for some testimony, I believe, I've been told. And we don't want Amtrak to run late to the Hill. So we will entertain one more question. Peter, you've got the mic.
I'll just go ahead and defer my time because I'll bring it into my next session around UIC, and I think that'll be.
Thanks,
appropriate.
Peter.
Yeah.
I would have liked to have gotten Eduardo and Fabrizio involved as well, but we have run out of time. We're in fact 5 minutes over, so I'm sorry, I'm not on time. But I appreciate your attention, and I guess it's time for a break. And I want you all to thank our wonderful panelists.